Sirianni beat the Browns, yelled at his own fans, said he yelled at his own fans because his players asked him to show more passion, and then he apologized for the passion, which caused him to yell at his own fans. So that's where we're at. For Nick Sirianni and the Eagles, here's his record against the NFC East. Pretty good. Must win. Eagles at Giants.
Yeah, definitely a must win. Sirianni's just kind of lost. We wouldn't have been surprised if he had actually gotten fired off that win.
Yeah.
So it's still out there. We saw it happen, obviously, with the Jets. If they beat Pittsburgh, coach, maybe the coaches, or the people up in Philadelphia are like, hey, we could fire our guy middle of the season, too. They have, look, Nick and I disagree. Offensively, particularly, they got a lot of talent. They're one of the most talented offenses in the league. Offensive line is great. Saquon Barkley's great. Both receivers are great. Even if Jalen Hurts isn't great, he's still got a ton of weapons to work with. So Sirianni needs to get this done and win this game. So it's absolutely a must-win.
But that's why, Brew, it's such an indictment that they have 0 first-quarter points this year. Now, I understand they were missing those 2 receivers for a couple games. I get that. But to have that much talent and to be the worst first-quarter team in the league offensively.
And it's a franchise record for first quarters where they haven't scored.
Exactly right. And you feel like that is, a coaching issue. When Nick Sirianni is your offensive mastermind, but we don't really know what he does in any. We still don't really know what Nick Sirianni does. Because he doesn't call the offense, he doesn't call the defense. He does yell at the fans, but he's not supposed to do that. He does have press conferences that he apologizes for. And so they looked unprepared and bad coming off the bye. If then you play the Giants, who we just saw, despite treating every drive like it was 4-down territory, couldn't get to double digits against the woeful Bengals defense. And now that Giants team, by the way, is without the best player on their team, arguably the left tackle, Andrew Thomas. If you were to lose that game, I do think he'd be fired.
Ooh, I think the crowd's going to be a lot nicer at MetLife than it would be in Philly. I think he's going to get a warmer reception there than he would have at home.
All right. Final one.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, listen, you guys know at this point, I don't think Nick Sirianni is a good coach, and it's so interesting to see. I see a lot of Philly fans. I would say it's 70-30%. 70% do not like Nick Sirianni, and the 30% do like Sirianni. And some of the defenses of him are kind of bizarre, quite frankly. And they see some of the success that the Eagles have had over the last few years as Sirianni, I guess, leading that way. And I just don't think anyone really truly believes that, who really knows football, knows that franchise, knows how things kind of unfolded. I mean, the way how the roster is constructed, the success they had before when they had 2 great coordinators who are now both head coaches, that's where that success came from. Sirianni didn't come in here and build this team and sculpt an identity. He didn't do that. That's not Sirianni. And I was talking to people in the comments, and it was just the Eagles are such a highly run franchise. They're one of the best run franchises in the NFL. But keeping Sirianni and doing this whole song and dance has definitely made me view them slightly skeptical. I'm kind of this doesn't feel like this is the way how the Philadelphia Eagles would handle this. And someone in the comments said that they're going to let Sirianni try to fix this to signal other coaches, hey, we give you a chance. And I get that, but also any real legit reputable coach who's the real deal, who has some clout, who could be I don't want to take this job, right? Which there's not going to be many coaches. The Philadelphia Eagles offer you a head coaching job. It's going to be at the top of the list of any available coach, right? The Philadelphia Eagles are a massive, massive franchise, iconic, great ownership, great GM, great roster, great fan base, one of the most popular and highest value teams in the NFL. So it's not they don't have to do a lot of selling, quite frankly. But if a coach was like that, right, where they can kind of pick and choose, they're going to understand they're not going to be like, oh my God, they fired Sirianni in the middle of the season. They're going to be like, yeah, he was clearly not a good coach. Like he's not going to hold that coach, the Eagles' feet to the fire for firing Nick Sirianni in the middle of the season. I understand. And I could see that if it was like the Cleveland Browns, the Jacksonville Jaguars, right? Some of these other teams that you got to like really fight for a coach. You got to really fight for people to come, but players want to play for Philly. Coaches want to coach for Philly. People want to go to Philly. Look no further than just the current roster right now, right? AJ wanting to come to Philly. Saquon Barkley wanting to come to Philly. Like these players, big time players want to play in Philly. Ex-players love it. So you don't have to think about what's the perception of firing Sirianni. And quite frankly, look what's going on with Doug Peterson down in Jacksonville Jaguars. Like that firing has aged very well. Chip Kelly, he's not in the NFL. He hasn't taken over another team in the NFL and is just riding high, right? Like so, like some of the if you can question maybe some of the hires for the Eagles, but I don't know if you can question the fires outside of course Andy Reid. But listen, that's what happened. Lots of teams move on from coaches, so it's just yeah. I think this is a must win for Sirianni and a must win for the Philadelphia Eagles. And you guys know, like, I'm not a big fan of the whole must win. I constantly leave room for teams to lose and say, hey, as long as they play really well, if they lose, this, that, like I can explain away a loss, with the best of them, quite frankly. But it feels as though the Eagles, they've already burned those for the most part, right? They've burned those. And when you have some crazy stuff with your coach, and how some of the issues with the Eagles were explained away by saying, hey, there's some key injuries to key players and this, that, and the third. When you explain, when you do that, and I think those are justifiable reasons, when everyone is full strength and you're playing an inferior team like the Giants, then it's like you gotta beat them. And you gotta have a convincing win. I'm not of the school of thought where, and I actually said this in a previous video, but it was not with the Eagles, with a completely different team. I forget what the context was, but there's the idea that if you're a great team, you just dominate bad teams, right? And that's kind of an indicator of how great you are. And I kind of disagree with that, quite frankly, because I think you can still be a great team and still just kind of continue to win closer games. I'm not saying every game should be like a last-minute field goal win, but just being able to roll another team is not an indicator of how great you are. Definitely some great teams can do it, without a doubt, of course. But again, Eagles fans will know this. Like, look no further than what the Cowboys did to the Browns, right? And you would say, oh, the Cowboys are this great team, and then they got rolled by the Saints, and then now look what's happening to the Saints, So it's just like rolling a team does not mean how good you are. And the Saints have proven, the Chiefs have proven that over the last 2 years. The Chiefs have had some close games with questionable teams, mainly more last year than this year, and they obviously went on to win the Super Bowl. So it's hard to always figure out. You can't just go by score. You got to figure out what makes you special. And the Chiefs were able to get away with it mainly because they're a defensive-led team, right? That's what made them special. But if it's a low-scoring game or games are close with the Eagles, and again, more low-scoring than high-scoring, this makes more sense too, that would be problematic to a degree because you would say your offense can't put up points, and your defense has not shown you to be good enough to be able to lead you deep into the playoffs and into a Super Bowl. So that's what would be more concerning about it than anything. If this was like an ultra high scoring game and they were putting up points, let's say the score was like 35, 30, 2 or whatever, then you could make the argument, okay, the offense is cooking now, right? They got things going, but the defense is in trouble, right? And it's like, and those would be worthwhile questions to have. So it's going to be interesting because the Browns, I think they were favored by like 7 or 8 points versus the Browns. And now you have the Giants, and I'm not sure. I guess Vegas views the Giants as slightly better than the Browns, but it can't be like a whole tier above, quite frankly. I mean, maybe it is, but then you see the favor is 3, and granted, the Giants are home. So, which I guess I imagine if the Eagles were at home, then they would probably be back in that 6-7 range. And again, I'm only using that as a reference point as a quality of how good do they think the Giants are versus how good are the Eagles. And so For me at this point, looking at the Eagles, trying to really figure out who they are, now that they have their full strength offensively, although I'm not sure what's the status with Dallas Goedert. But even so, even without Dallas Goedert, they clearly have enough weapons with Devontae, Saquon, AJ, Jalen. That offensive line should also be full strength, although my lad, I'm not sure. But should still be good enough versus the actual Giants. Like, this should be a convincing win. I'm not looking for a win like how the Cowboys beat the Steelers or the Giants, quite frankly, right? You're looking for just a more convincing win. It doesn't have to be like what the Lions did to the Cowboys. It doesn't have to be that either. But you're looking for a good, solid, confident win that it was clear you were in control throughout that entire game, that you are clearly the better team. That's ultimately what I'm looking for. People put a lot of pressure on that Browns game that they better roll the Browns, right? And anything short of like a 33-10 game is a failure. I don't see it that way, especially at least to the, versus the Giants. But I don't want to. I think if they had another win that was like the Browns, then again, if you're an Eagles fan, you're going to be like, well, really, how good is this team? Is this team ceiling like make the playoffs but lose the first round, right? Like, is that what this is? But if they can kind of regain some momentum, have a really convincing win, then you can kind of start to be like, all right, they got the momentum, they got this going back. And then honestly, if they win 2 games and they have a good, convincing, positive win versus the Giants, people will start up having the talks about Nick Sirianni again and saying, is Nick Sirianni no longer on the hot seat, right? Like, that will be back what the conversations are on, right? Like, and so that's what a good, convincing win will do. So there's definitely a lot at stake. And I do agree, though. But though the other thing I wanted to make sure to point out, the Eagles, Jeffrey Lurie and Howie Roseman, are not looking to the Jets as a frame of reference of what to do with their coach. They're not like, oh, the Jets fired their coach, and look, they won a game, therefore we're going to do that. Like, what? The Jets have done nothing for the last, 20 plus years, whereas the Eagles are, I always say this, they're a top 3 team in playoff wins for the last, 20 plus years, right? I mean, like what? They have more Super Bowl appearances than the Jets have playoff wins in the last, 20. The Eagles have more Super Bowl appearances in the last 7 years than the Jets have playoff wins in the last 15 or 20 or whatever the number is. So let's they're not looking over to whatever the heck the Jets are doing as a frame of reference. That's like a comically, hilariously absurd claim to make. Notice how no other team has ever offered a quarterback contract like the Browns offered Deshaun Watson. And as Colin famously said, you don't look to bad teams to set the standard, okay? I don't care what this bad team did over there. It doesn't matter to me. They're a bad team for a reason. And that's not what we're going to do here. So I wanted to say that earlier in the clip, but because that stood out to me, and it was just like, no, we're not looking to the Jets. If it was a better team, a better run franchise like the 49ers, the Chiefs, the Rams, right, like any of these other teams who obviously they're not firing their coaches, but just a better run franchise, then you could maybe say, okay, you can get some inspiration from another high quality, highly run franchise. But you're not looking to the Jets as an idea of like, okay, this is what they're doing, sure. So that I find utterly absurd. But those are just my thoughts. I'd absolutely love to hear yours. What do you guys all think about the Philadelphia Eagles? Is it a must win versus the Giants? What type of win do you need to see? Do you think if they lose, they could get fired? Nick Sirianni could get fired. Let me know in the comments below. I read every single comment, so whether you agree with me or disagree with me, either way, let's get in some discussions, let's get in some fights, but ultimately, let's just have some fun. And please do consider subscribing. We are building an amazing community here, and I'd absolutely love to see you part of it. I want to build something that we all genuinely feel connected to, something that we're really excited to be part of. I think we're well on our way to doing it. And please don't forget to give this video a thumbs up, as it really does help with the visibility and the algorithm. Thank you so much. See you next time.